God bless him.
Don't miss a Mix Morning on Mix 104.1, served by Tzatziki's.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. It is 15 minutes after 4 o'clock, and we are pleased to be joined by the Attorney General of the volunteer state of Tennessee, Jonathan Skrmetti. Attorney, what do you call him? Mr. General Skrmetti, how are you?
I'm doing great, Steve. Thank you. Having a good time.
Well, welcome, and I know you've had a very busy day in our part of the state. Tell me what's been happening today.
So the Chattanooga Bar Association invited me out to talk for Law Day, just talk about democracy and the rule of law and a little bit about what the office has been up to. So I spoke to a room full of attorneys, and we had a good conversation. Then I went over to the Children's Advocacy Center in Hamilton County and met with General Wamp there, the District Attorney General. We talked about child sex cases, which is a horrible thing to talk about, but they happen, and she does a very good job with her team aggressively addressing those. And as someone who used to prosecute those for a living, I just always want to make sure that people know resources need to go to those. So it was a real privilege to get to talk with her about that.
We're joined by the Attorney General of Tennessee, Jonathan Skrmetti, live in studio here with us this afternoon. What were on the minds? So let's go back to the Chattanooga Bar Association for a moment. What were some of the things that were on their minds today?
So part of it is just trying to understand where I'm coming from with cases. When I sue the federal government, there are different policies that come into play, but ultimately it's always the same case. They are exceeding their constitutional powers. Usually it's a federal agency that's doing something to undermine Congress and take the people out of the lawmaking process. And so I talked a little bit about that and about how it doesn't matter if there's a Republican office or a Democrat in office. When federal policies bump against state policies, the states have to push back to keep the federal government from getting too strong. We have a system designed to do that. We haven't been doing it well. We need to aggressively pursue federal overreach and put a stop to it.
Well, and I want to bring up a couple of things here. You're part of an 18-state lawsuit against the equal employment.
The EEOC. The
EEOC. There we go.
Yeah.
It's been a long day, John. Anyway, but over new guidelines, they're calling it, and Title VII protections. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Title VII prohibits sex discrimination in employment. And the EEOC put out these sweeping guidelines that reinterpret that to address gender identity issues more broadly. So if you are a company that has showers or locker rooms or bathrooms and you've kept them sex segregated, so there's a men's room and a women's room, you're not able to do that anymore under this new guidance. If you have customers or employees that use the wrong pronoun for someone, so if someone wants to be called Miss and it's a man who identifies as a woman, and someone comes in and says, Mr., under these guidelines, your company will be liable for a civil rights violation if you don't correct the employee or correct the customer. So it's putting a huge burden on businesses. And the bottom line is Congress never voted on this. This is the EEOC rewriting a law that we've had for a long time and doing so in a way that's just divorced from the will of the people. It's federal overreach, it's illegal, and we're going to stop it.
We're joined by the Attorney General of Tennessee, Jonathan Skrmetti. Another suit that you file, along with 25 other states, suing the Biden administration on changes to Title IX. Tell me about that.
So Title IX is basically the same thing. Title IX is the sex discrimination in education law. So this deals with schools, both primary schools and university level schools. And the Title IX changes mean that if you have a locker room for girls and a boy walks into it, if you question why the boy is there, you don't have to know whether or not they identify as a girl because you're not allowed to ask. So if any boy just walks into the girls' locker room, you are going to be violating their civil rights by asking them questions about it or asking them to leave. It completely eliminates women's privacy. And under this new doctrine that the Supreme Court adopted, the major questions doctrine, major questions are supposed to be decided by Congress, not by the federal agencies. And eliminating sex segregated spaces is a pretty major question. It's not something that a couple bureaucrats can do on the fly.
Well, we're joined by Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti. I believe the first time we had you on, it was following your lawsuit against the NCAA and the NIL situation after the investigation at UT. Bring us an update on that, if you would. Tell us what's happening.
Sure. So we won our big injunction. The NCAA is not able to enforce its NIL rules. And we've since filed an amended complaint that did do a lot, but what it did do was bring in Florida, New York, and the District of Columbia. And a lot of people say, well, why are you working with New York? Obviously, their attorney general comes at things from a different direction than me, but it gives us tremendous credibility in the courts when you can say, listen, the guy who's suing the federal government every day and the woman who's going after Donald Trump are all coming together on this particular issue. And so I think it's going to help our case. And it's all about protecting student athletes, protecting competition. Markets work, and when there's that much money in the system, they have to have clear and fair rules that make sure that the student athletes aren't being taken advantage of.
Well, what's coming down the pike? Let me ask you this. What are we not talking enough about? What are we not thinking enough about right now? If you could narrow it down maybe to a couple of things.
Well, I mean, the transgender regulatory issues are probably the single biggest thing right now because it's a whole government effort. So every federal agency is going to be pushing through exactly the same sorts of rules, exactly the same sorts of guidelines, and all of this is done in opposition to what Congress did. So it's really a struggle for our Constitution. We're trying to say the executive branch is there to execute the law, that Congress has to make the law, and ultimately most laws should be at the state level. So this is a really existential fight for what our system of government looks like. It's coming up in other contexts too. We see it in the energy context. We see it in the appliance context. There are all sorts of regulatory overreaches happening. Apart from that, consumer protection and antitrust, because power being concentrated is an evil in itself. Doesn't matter if it's in the government or outside the government. If you have, say, BlackRock controlling huge chunks of the economy and working in concert with other big asset managers, the concentration of power there can be just as pernicious as the federal agencies, and we need to make sure we're checking that too.
Jonathan Skrmetti is the Attorney General of the state of Tennessee. Well, what's it been like being on God's side of the state?
I spent a lot of years in Memphis, and I love Memphis, I eat very well in Memphis.
Are you going to buy Graceland, by the way? And I hear it's up for sale.
So I saw that, and I was like, I wonder if I could get financing for that. The jungle room's pretty cool, but it is just so dang pretty out here. Yeah. I mean, my family came with me today. My wife and kids hitched a ride, and they're down at the aquarium and the Discovery Museum in Chattanooga right now. And they were commenting on the geography. It is just so beautiful out here. Everybody's so nice. I mean, this is a great part of the state, and it's really fun to get to visit.
Well, Jonathan Skrmetti, the Attorney General of the volunteer state. Hey, I appreciate you coming by right here in studio with us, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes, sir. All right, we're going to take a quick time out here, and also we're on Mix TV. .tv this afternoon and Mix 1041 for this interview. So we're going to take a break here, and we'll bring Mike Lee back. Mike, by the way, I'm going to go back to the Attorney General for a second. He had to leave because he got several warrants against him, so he couldn't stay in here with you. So anyway, all right, we're going to come right back in just a moment. Stand by.
Good afternoon.